obviously I'm not encouraging people to stop talking to other people, but rather than just asking, the more experienced engineer that works with you what his opinion is, you can now basically ask something that's synthesized the opinion of thousands or millions of engineers over a period of many decades. That sounds like a massive opportunity to me.
Today, we're delving deep into a topic that's rapidly transforming the way we build our world: data. Data is the lifeblood of the modern construction industry, reshaping everything from project management to safety protocols, and even the very designs that shape our cities. As the construction industry continues to evolve, adopting innovative technologies at an unprecedented pace, the effective use of data is emerging as a critical catalyst for progress. It's not just about bricks and mortar anymore. It's about bits and bytes too. At the forefront of the UK construction technology industry, data is being harnessed for good to drive efficiency, sustainability, and safety in construction projects of all sizes. But data is never a one size fits all. As each set of data is collected, analysed, and leveraged differs slightly due to the nature of the fragmented industry, meaning we must continually look for different ways to make this information work for us humans. Look for different ways to make this information enhance decision-making processes, streamline construction operations, and ultimately construct a future that's more connected and responsive to the demands of our rapidly changing world. To help us unravel the complexities of construction data, we're chatting to Ian Gordon, author of Data and the Built Environment, a book that helps to explain how data and the digital technologies that use data can help the built environment sector deliver value to society. Simply put, it's a love story about the built environment and the data it produces. When not writing, Ian helps normal people like me use data for the public good, covering all manner of technical subjects such as deep breath, the cloud, ontologies and knowledge graphs, digital twins, data models, BI, interoperability, UI, UX, APIs, open data standards, decision support, automation, and that all important craft beer. Ian has worked on a range of high profile projects for Highways England, Network Rail, Transport for Wales, Transport Scotland, Thames Tideway Tunnel, and most recently, Houses of Parliament restoration and renewal. Ian, hello and welcome.
Hey, thank you for the introduction. That was great. I loved every minute of that. It's nice to yeah, I was like, that actually sounds quite good. I quite like that.
Fantastic. Did I miss anything?
I don't know. Like, not really. I think you added some stuff, if anything. So that's great. Good marketing right away.
That's what we're here to do, make a few things up amongst all the truisms. Tell me a little bit, before we get started, tell me a little bit more about that craft beer. Have you got a favourite? Are you just a little bit of a connoisseur? Do you just sample?
It became a slightly unhealthy obsession. Obviously, the whole craft beer industry kind of blossomed in the 2010s with the rise of BrewDog and those sort of people. And a lot of the influence from the States in particular. And I think that the culture became essentially, there's an app, because there's always an app, and the obsessives, it became kind of basically like Pokemon. You had to find the weirdest, usually strongest, rarest beers, and then take a picture of you drinking that beer. And it in a quite unhealthy way, it became all about how many you could have and how many different ones and all of that stuff. I'm kind of, and I got really into the data side of that. So like,
of course,
quite quantitative. There's like scores for the different styles and stuff. So I used to do little articles and analysis on that sort of thing, which was fun. But fundamentally, alcohol's bad for you, and treating alcohol like it's Pokemon isn't necessarily a great life decision. And I've kind of learned that one in the long run and tried to chill out a little bit.
Okay, cool. Right, noted. life lesson number one.
There you go. Start on a downer. Alcohol's bad.
Yeah, well, let's bring it back up and focus. First and foremost on your book, Data and the Built Environment. I've just got a quote from your book, and then I'll get your take on this challenge that we seem to face within construction, which is a bigger challenge, but this is a subset of that challenge, I feel. So what you put was, in a sector that does not yet always think in terms of data problems are often explained by human failure. However, many of the issues that bedevil mega projects have their origin in the use of complex data processing challenges, including optimism bias in cost estimates and benefits projects, working around bottlenecks in the program, agreeing on a regulated asset-based funded model, or monitoring and managing supplier performance. Okay, that was a long-winded way of saying, or what I'd like to know, what I felt you were trying to get at, is that there's a bit of a skills shortage or skills knowledge gap from a human perspective. And we hear this all the time within construction, that there's a skills shortage, but the subset of that, I feel, is that there's a massive need for people that know the data more, like data analysts, for example. Is this your take on things? Where are we in this skills shortage from a data perspective?
I think there's a subtlety there. Listening to that made me realize that I need to write shorter sentences. But aside from that, so in the purpose of writing, apart from it just being a generally self-indulgent exercise, is to try and, to a certain extent, explain to myself some of the stuff that hasn't been making sense to me in this industry or this sector over the years. I've been around here long enough to feel like I have a sense of the place, but not long enough to feel like I'm part of the furniture just yet. Mm-hmm. And it has struck me that we live in this weird duality of, you go to like Digital Construction Week and it always feels like, or London Build or UK Construction Week or whatever your favorite conference is, and it always feels like you're like 2 weeks and one purchase order away from massive digital transformation and all your problems being solved. And then you go back to the office and everything takes forever. And you look at the sort of track record of the industry, and it doesn't seem to be getting better, no matter how much money we spent on digital stuff. And I was just trying to make sense of that. And I think part of what I came away with is we have it's a storied sector. There's professions like architects and quantity surveyors and project managers that have been in professional bodies for hundreds of years. Engineers should have started with engineers, of course. These are rightfully so respected professions with a massive history of accomplishing things behind them, and huge bodies of literature and that sort of thing. And yet that's a great asset to have, but it's also a sort of it comes with a lot of baggage, right? It comes with very specific ways of doing things, a culture that rewards certain behaviors and certain ways of working. And it's not so much long-winded responses. It's not so much a skills shortage in the sense that we need to, from my perspective at least, funnel lots and lots and lots of like computer science grads into the industry and like something miraculous happens. I think that would just be a recipe for disaster. I think it's about understanding how to incorporate a data perspective into these existing professions, in addition to creating enough of a critical mass of data specialists as well to complement that. It's kind of a bit of both, right? And I think we've seen in the industry over the last, certainly whilst I've been working in it, all of the big engineering consultancies have started recruiting data teams. They all have data science teams. Probably by the time this podcast comes out, I'll be running one of them. So it's not like there's a lack of capability in that space. What there is a lack of how do we integrate that capability into the stuff that we've been doing for, a couple of 100 years at this point. And I think that's the interesting question. And that's where you need there's almost a skill gap of people that can bridge the professions, if that makes sense.
Do you think that will get easier over the next decade or so with this transition or increase of digital natives coming into the industry just because of that age group that will be coming through very shortly? Do you think there'll be they'll almost demand this technology and information and data rather than be born into an industry where we've always done it like this?
I hope so, but sometimes I worry that the opposite's going to happen. I think, there's already a bit of cognitive dissonance between what you can accomplish using consumer electronics in your private life and what you can accomplish at work using enterprise IT. And obviously you need a bit of that tension for things to get better, but my concern is that gap widens so much to the point where it's I don't know, it's almost borderline intolerable to work as a digital native, as you say, to come in and almost surrender all that privilege at your office door so that you can keep doing the same old thing in Microsoft Excel forever. I'm sure that does already chase people out of the sector. Particularly people early in their career that are maybe trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. And I can see that becoming more of an issue rather than less of an issue as we move forward.
Oh, okay. So let's look at potential solutions then. In doing research for this podcast, I read a really interesting article, really succinct, that you put together for BIM Plus. And there was a statement in there which you put: we build, maintain, and operate the built environment through the coordinated labour of human actors. This means that our success in applying data to the built environment relies upon our ability to improve the flow of knowledge between individuals and computers. So how do we do that? How do we better improve that flow of knowledge?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. If once you figure that one out, there's a lot of strands you can pull on here, right? I think that's why one neglects user interface design at one's peril. I think that's why we see adoption as so important in deploying any sort of technology, and it's often a bit that's kind of neglected or assumed will happen organically. I think more abstractly, and I think it's probably something I was talking about there, was whether there's the opportunity to, particularly through AI, realize some shortcuts in that space where that hasn't been possible. Some of my first experiences in this industry were working for Network Rail, and which I loved as a consultant, and basically having to produce models to justify investment decisions to the regulator. And we wanted those models to be based on reality, right? And what that meant in practice was, to a surprisingly large extent, trying to get the models to come up with the same answer as a veteran engineer would come up with. And that in and of itself was an exercise. I didn't really realize at the time, but was an exercise in trying to translate the knowledge that's in people's heads into a digital replica. There's this idea of the knowledge cycle, which I kind of was quite taken with, getting tacit knowledge out of people's heads, turning it into explicit knowledge in a digital environment, and then using that explicit knowledge in the digital environment to then inform tacit knowledge in other people, right? And if you state the obvious here, if you get that right, that's how I've been reading a book called, it's either Why Information Grows or How Information Grows, but it's this idea that the real limiting factor in human endeavors, including the built environment, is individuals can only fit so much knowledge in their head. So the only way that we manage to do anything complex is by externalizing that knowledge and putting it into some sort of solid object that allows other people to make use of it, whether that object is the written word in a book, or a dashboard on Power BI, or like an actual physical product that people can use and then replicate. That's how we. Man, I'm going on some tangents today. Apologies. That's how we scale our understanding and make sure it's sustainable. And that's the opportunity with digital tools, is to make that process faster and more accurate. But it's also the challenge, because basically you're competing against people that, not so much competing, but you're trying to complement something that's already really good, right? Someone with 40 years, I'm thinking of a fellow I used to work with called Nigel Ricketts, who at the point I'd worked with, he'd basically built all the bridges 40 years ago, and now all the bridges were deteriorating and needed work. So obviously the person to go to ask what to do with the bridges was the person that built them 40 years ago. And I quickly realized there was no way in hell that I was going to build a model that was going to come up with a better answer than Nigel Ricketts was going to come up with. So my job became, how do I build a model that does what Nigel Ricketts would have said, which was really, really difficult, in part because the information in Nigel's brain about those bridges was way more detailed than anything the organization had actually managed to record about those bridges. So the organization knew it's a brick bridge, it's more or less this size, it's more or less this old. None of the detail and the richness that allowed Nigel to make his decisions was actually externalized into a way that other people could make use of it.
I've never thought about it from that flow of knowledge from a human to a computer. So that flow of knowledge from a computer to a human is better. But I suppose that makes sense, doesn't it? Because somebody has to program it. We have to get that information from somewhere.
I'm not an AI expert at all, but that's my interpretation of this generation of AIs. They are better at not so much getting information out of people's heads, because that sounds creepy, but taking the information that people have already externalized in the form of the internet, and turning that into useful information that other people can use.
Yeah,
hopefully,
for sure. So let's stick with the information or data, if you like. Another quote from the book, if you don't mind, is you wrote, "To work with the built environment is to reckon with complexity," which I think we can all absolutely fundamentally agree. Complexity rarely stems from the assets or the technology, but from the human, societal, and political context. Data solutions that do not reckon with this complexity are unlikely to realize lasting change. So, taking that complexity, how do we know that the data and information we're looking at is reliable to make valid decisions?
It's culture, right? So there is it's a culture of ownership, which is a really easy thing to say, but we are not in a position yet where the majority of our data is captured automatically, right? Most information in this industry still, as we've already talked about, goes through the minds and the hands of human beings before it is collected, or is at least interpreted and validated by human beings before it's being used. And therefore, people need to feel empowered, or rather, people need to be empowered to own and change that data to best fit reality. And I think part of what your first question was about, this lack of data skills and fitting data into existing professions, is not fixing data be an IT problem, not even having it being a data team problem, but rather fixing the data, keeping the data at high quality, being interpreted as a responsibility of whoever happens to be closest to it at any given point in the data and project lifecycle, right? I was a latecomer to the data governance philosophy, but I really see the value of creating data stewardship as a discipline within organizations, not as a new role or an external role, but as something that you do as part of your job. Yeah. And I think where we've failed at times as a profession, and where I've failed personally, is explaining to people that even though they may not realize that data is part of their job, there's almost nobody on any sort of modern infrastructure project or organization that doesn't use some sort of data on a day-to-day basis. So making people aware that that is the case, and kind of infusing them with the understanding that, hey, this is an opportunity to make my job easier, better, more efficient, whatever it happens to be, because I get to own the data that I'm using. I'm not subservient to IT to provide me with data. This is something that I can own myself. And likewise, if it's not working, I don't have to just sit and whinge all day about how the database is broken and no one ever fixes it. Like there's actually something I can do about that. And again, going back to the bridges example, pretty much my entire career is just trying to fix what I saw there of there was data on the assets that did not reflect reality, but there was the organization had created no way for the people who were closest to the assets, the people that were maintaining them, that were inspecting them, whatever, to fix the data. So they knew it was wrong. They would moan about it being wrong, but there wasn't an edit button that allowed them to fix the data when they showed up and realized that, oh, this culvert isn't where it's supposed to be, or this bridge isn't the size it's supposed to be, or whatever that additional information they had in their minds was that wasn't reflected in the corporate data set.
Do you think within the industry then, there's that lack of knowledge for those particular things, and knowing that there is something that can help solve those problems that's, more digital, more technical? Is there a lack of knowledge and information to point people in that direction?
I think we've kind of failed to create systems and ways of working that allow interactivity, right? We've seen data as something that we push to people. We have our enterprise asset management system. It's got our regulated asset base. Everything in here is our list of what assets we have and where they are and all that stuff. Here, Mr. Operative, here's your task list and the associated assets. Go and do it. And it's not occurred to us to include the functionality to create that feedback loop, even though we live in a world, in a social media world, where there is a bi-directional flow of information, right? YouTube isn't just somewhere that you go to watch cat videos. You can upload your own cat video. You can edit your own tweets. Yeah, exactly. You can post your own pictures on Instagram. It's a bi-directional flow of information. We don't have a bi-directional flow of information in this industry. And I think part of that comes from a conservatism around, our data is important, which it is, and therefore it has to be sacrosanct, and therefore we can only let 3 people in an organization of 50,000 change the data, because otherwise it'll be wrong, as if it's not already wrong. And so there's that risk aversion that stops us from making use of the very resources that could fix the problem, because we're worried about that 1 in 100 instance where someone just writes a bunch of nonsense in a database, it isn't caught, and therefore we make bad decisions based on that nonsense. And I think that's a loss of imagination, and it's not something that's easy to fix, but it's something we need to fix. I was convincing myself as I spoke there. I became very, very convinced by my own argument as I made it up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, continuing that argument, do you even think it's possible to have that free flow of information within this industry then?
I hope so. I think it's how do you establish mechanisms for trust, right?
Yeah.
And we live in a world where there's plenty of crowdsourcing. You go on the BBC News, you can send them videos of stuff, right? There's the concept of crowdsourcing, even amongst the general public, has been established. Why can we not arrive at a similar process for people that work for us? Like, we've given them jobs, we must trust them to some extent. Why do we not trust them enough with the information that they're using to do their work? That strikes me as strange. And obviously, one would like to think that we can be quite sophisticated in terms of how we validate and audit what they are sending back to us to make sure that we catch the truly absurd stuff or the mistakes. Let's just say let's assume they're honest mistakes. Let's assume that everyone's trying to do their best, because I think by and large they are. But honest mistakes will happen, and we need a way of capturing those. I think that's a more interesting avenue of inquiry as to how do we do that than how do we lock it down so that no one can ever do anything themselves.
Yeah, I find that concept a little bit bizarre as well, in terms of the locking it down and not having that free flow of information. Because just to back up what you said, why would you employ somebody that you don't trust? Yeah, errors happen, human errors happen, but why would you employ somebody that you don't trust to do something that you're asking them to do? You wouldn't. So you only employ the people that you trust. Therefore, they should be able to help you with data and utilizing that data for good.
Of course. And, it's going back to the point about the different professions and such, like we often use that as a reason to silo information. And, the engineers should have access to the engineering data, nobody else. Commercial people should be the only ones that can see anything with a pound sign on it. There's clearly a logic to that, but again, I think it's I don't know. There's the kind of information wants to be free philosophy that I, as a data person, is quite appealing to me, and I don't see that reflected enough in the organizations that I work with.
Yeah. Do you think you were talking about that cognitive bias before? Do you think that impacts it here in a strange way, in that in our daily lives, we're told how unsecure our data is online, and how passwords are found and your data's been breached and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that in our daily lives impacts the trustworthiness of our employees, or even ourselves, to have that free flow of information?
Yeah, I think no one wants to be the guy that was, or the girl that was responsible for a data breach, right? No one wants to be the person that signs off on publishing data that it then turns out shouldn't have been published. And there are obviously parts of our infrastructure that absolutely should be kept as secret as possible, or reasonably secret. There's appropriate ways of categorizing such things. But the vast majority of any country's infrastructure, by its very nature, is in the public domain, right? Like, you can literally go and figure out where all the bridges are, and the power lines, and the roads and stations and that sort of thing. And I've always struggled with arguments that are made for protecting information that is already in effect in the public domain by virtue of being part of the real world. That's where I struggle. Before you get on to the infrastructure, like the IT infrastructure challenges of making data available, which are not, inconsiderable, you always have to get permission to publish the data, and that's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to do. And I don't think it's as as a standardized reaction to things as it should be here. There's always the concern of, is it commercially sensitive? Is it a competitive advantage? Does it bias the market? Is there a cybersecurity repercussions? And there's always a reason to say no. Sometimes there's a good reason to say no, but there isn't always a good reason to say no, and therefore we shouldn't always be saying no. I'm just getting a bit grumpy now, but I think that's part of what holds us back, honestly.
Yeah, and there's always going to be that part of us that wants to say no to certain things. I mean, I work in marketing, and I'm forever saying that no should be a big part of our vocabulary, when a lot of it is yes sir, yes boss, let's just do that, and not have that structured approach. So I'm all for saying no as well as yes. And I fundamentally see it here and what you're saying there. I just want to move on a little bit and focus around decision making. One thing that you wrote when you were talking about data strategies and why they fail was data strategies fail not because we can't find or manage data. I think that's quite obvious. It's there, data's all around us, isn't it? But because once we have it, we are often structurally and conceptually incapable of taking advantage of it, which kind of links to what we were saying previously. So, how if we can get the data and we know it is authentic and trustworthy, how do we utilize that to make decisions or impact the future of an organization? What's the best ways of doing that?
Yeah. Well, it varies enormously on the use case. But I think the first thing we need to think about is the psychology of the decision we're making, right? So are we genuinely approaching this problem with an open mind, or are we trying to retrospectively justify a decision that we've already made? There are a lot of biases, as we've already talked about in this industry, around the kind of decisions that we make, right? So a particular bugbear of mine of late is just building stuff in general, right? We are, by definition, an industry that rewards people for building things. And you kind of see this in the, I'm not going to name individual projects, but the cost benefit analysis of, constructing new infrastructure. There's always going to be a bias towards, well, it's 50-50 as to whether there's an ROI on this, but we should probably just do it because it gives us, at least we're doing something, right? Long story short, part of the answer is making sure that we are actually considering all of the data and all of the options rather than just trying to justify a decision that we've already made. I think there's then what we've already talked about, making sure that the data that we're providing people is an accurate reflection of reality, but is also consumable by people. And I think that comes into the knowledge creation cycle. We've all sat in meetings where someone's announced, well, we used to write a Word document or do a PowerPoint. Now we've got a dashboard, and they'll bring their dashboard up on screen, and there's 16 different graphs that you have to squint and be like, not sure what that says. And then you actually ask a question about one of them, and you get the answer. Well, it's not up to date. Don't worry about that graph. Look at all the other graphs. And I think that's reflective of a culture that's sort of, maybe not a culture, but a difficulty in actually integrating information into our decision-making process. We confuse detail and providing lots and lots of detail with helping decisions, whereas actually, as Kahneman and others have shown, we're actually really simple people when it comes to decisions. And so we should be trying to create a visual language or even an AI language of information that allows people to actually integrate data into their decision making, which is probably, and I'm a big believer in Edward Tufte and people like that who write a lot about the aesthetics of presenting information. It's usually about having one really simple graph that summarizes the problem as best as possible so that people can actually digest it and understand it, rather than here's a vast array. It's the Minority Report view of dashboarding where it's I'm Tom Cruise and I'm surrounded in 16 screens and I can click, and nobody uses an interface like that, right? So that's when I talk about how being a data professional in this space is in part about creativity. I think that's where the creativity comes in. It's about abstracting, it's about simplification, it's about presentation and aesthetics as much as it is about just here's a shed load of information, now go and be quote unquote data driven, because that's just not how human beings are programmed. We're lazy, our brains look for simple answers, and we need to kind of work with that rather than resist it to a certain extent.
Yeah, for sure. I was at that conversation in marketing that's why we set objectives, right? So we set an objective and then we focus on achieving that. And if that objective is to increase revenue, for example, and you've got a chart that shows an increase of revenue, then why do you need another 4 or 5 charts that show margin and profit and all this kind of stuff? Because that wasn't the objective. Those are helpful, but on a smaller level, because that was not your objective. Yeah, and I find it baffling when you see a lot of different information and charts, and it tells you loads of different stuff. But was that what you were trying to achieve? Is that what we set out to do? And I think it's easy to lose sight of that.
Yeah, I think there's also a discipline around having agreed sources of truth and the culture of making sure that those are actually what is used. I'm a big proponent, as you can probably tell, of giving people as much freedom to manipulate information as they see fit. Modern BI tools and stuff are great. I think there's a huge amount of value in allowing people to self-service analysis and be able to do part of that as part of their job, whether or not they're an analyst or not. But that cannot be licensed for multiple different versions of the truth competing with each other. I think it's a bit of the collaborate on the rules, compete on the game sort of thing. You need to collaborate on creating those aggregated sources of information, those common sources of information for organizations, and then allow your colleagues, the wider organization, to come up with their interpretations and fight over the interpretations of that information rather than fighting over what is or is not the truth. And I work in a lot of places where the truth is whatever Bob's spreadsheet happens to say today. And if someone comes along with a nicer spreadsheet, then that becomes the truth. And I don't, again, it's not a healthy dialogue there.
Looking towards the future then, or whenever I say future, it's almost like it's in the present now. There was one short statement that you made that said, recent developments in artificial intelligence have been nothing short of profound. In terms of this new tech, or however you want to call it, AI modeling and AI in general, how is that going to impact data and information and the way we utilize it going forward?
I think it's that externalization. Does it allow us to accelerate the externalization of information, right? So these technologies are amazing. We all got extremely excited about them earlier this year. I feel like what we're starting to see is that they're kind of unbelievably sophisticated models, but they are limited by what they're fed, right? So we've just pointed them at the internet and said, again, going back to the idea of truth, here is objective reality. Everything on the internet is true. Please just give us this really intuitive way of searching the entire internet and explain it back to us in plain English so that we understand it. Amazing. It's not going to work for our sector because the level of truth required to maintain buildings and railways and power networks is higher than the level of truth that's possible from the internet. No one is going to come up with a maintenance plan for critical national infrastructure by asking about it on a Reddit forum and seeing what people come back with, right? That's a bad idea. So we need to figure out a way of using these incredible techniques, but feeding them with the higher standards of information that we already use. Unfortunately, and I think this is where the challenge is, our higher standard of information is not anywhere near as accessible as the internet. It's spread across hundreds of different organizations, hundreds of different archives. You've obviously got BSI and stuff like that, but even then, to get to the corpus of information, you would have to integrate a huge range of different, often proprietary documents. Probably do a lot of scanning and NLP and stuff and OCR in order to get there as well. So someone's going to do it. It is going to help because it's going to probably not give you exactly the right answer, but get you closer to the right answer faster. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for someone, if you're starting out in the industry. Obviously, I'm not encouraging people to stop talking to other people, but, rather than just asking, the more experienced engineer that works with you what his opinion is, you can now basically ask something that's synthesized the opinion of thousands or millions of engineers over a period of many decades. That sounds like a massive opportunity to me, but the data quality problem is what's going to make or break whether that actually delivers the benefit that we hope it will, as is always the case, right? Yeah, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, for sure. I always say that at this moment in time, it's AI with HI, so artificial intelligence combined with human intelligence.
Yeah,
is the best way of looking at it. And like you said, working with other people is part of that intelligence.
Yeah, there isn't a scenario where we just don't have engineers in 20 years. I honestly believe that. I think there's a scenario where those engineers are much more collaborative and data driven and augmented by AI, but they're still going to be there. We're still going to need them, probably even more than we do right now.
So chapter 8 of your book is titled "How to Be a Data Person," and the subsections in that are around how to be how to do this, how to do that. So I'm just going to ask you straight out rather than reel them off. How do we be a data person?
Again, trying to figure that out. I think there was a bit of self-therapy in writing that section. I was going through quite a tricky time in work, and I was trying to figure out why everything was so hard. I think there was also trying to capture a little bit of the opportunity, right? I've talked a lot about the professions. Coming back to professions is obviously oversimplifying to a certain extent, but it's not every day that a whole new field appears in our sector in a way that it has appeared recently with data, right? I guess the closest we have to that is maybe when BIM became a thing a decade ago. Maybe it happens once a decade. Let's go with that. So there's obviously opportunities there in terms of technical capabilities and software and solutions and all the exciting things that we've talked about. But there's also kind of a cultural opportunity there in terms of we are one way or another bringing a new type of person into our organizations. How do we make sure that we're taking advantage of that opportunity, right? Because if whilst I have talked at length about how a lot of this needs to be delivered through existing employees, there will nonetheless be data teams. So how do we make sure that when we get permission to recruit those data teams, that we're having a positive influence on the organizations that we work for? And there's the obvious one is it's a chance to bring in diversity into our industry that hasn't always been there. New perspectives, neurodiversity as well. One way or another, data people are going to have a slightly different character bent to someone that's decided to be an architect or a planner or something. I'm not saying one's better than the other. They all have their place. And then on the flip side, when you have different types of people coming into quite well established hierarchical organizations where there are these roles that have existed for 50, 100 years, how do you use these new people to influence those roles without it just becoming a bit of a you don't understand, you haven't been here long enough, or no, you don't understand, to get with the program and the future is here, AI everywhere. You can see those kind of anyone that's worked in this space has experienced a little bit of that friction, right? Who are these trendy kids coming in and telling me how to do my job, type of thing. And obviously once you get to that point, you've kind of already lost. It's not going to end. It's not necessarily going to end well. And you probably have screwed up a little bit in terms of your messaging if that's kind of the conversations you're having. So how do you approach the challenge to, again, take advantage of the opportunity without unnecessarily just kind of running in and pissing everybody off, for lack of a better way of describing it?
One thing I wanted to end on, it's a bit of a step change away from data and information, but still in that same field, is you ended this chapter with respect your own time and your mind, learn and think about mental health. Those were 3 or 4 chapters that you finished, sub-chapters that you finished chapter 8 with. So is this something that you've learnt while writing? We all know that it's all important, but in terms of being involved in the data, how do you respect your own time and think or learn about mental health?
I mean, that's something I've learned the hard way through a number of experiences. I think that the time element is the realization that there's still a lot of presenteeism around here. And particularly when you're in the public sector, there's a lot of governance and hierarchical reporting and that sort of thing. And it can be very easy to realize that actually you're not in charge of your own time. So before you start the work week, it's already accounted for by the 500 meetings that other people have put in your calendar. And I think that's initially quite flattering because it makes you feel important, but in the long run it's completely unsustainable because you don't have any space to learn anything new. And going back to the previous conversation, if you're one of the few data people in an organization and you're not learning anything new, then you're probably not going to be adding value for very long. And then it has ramifications onto the mental health side of things, where if you're not growing, if you're not giving yourself space to reflect on your experiences and understand what you did wrong and what you might do better, and to learn from other people, then you're probably not going to be happy. Maybe happy is the wrong word, but fulfilled in your career, and that will obviously have, particularly for kind of career orientated people like us, can have real repercussions into the rest of your life, and start affecting your family life and your life outside of work. So, and it's just a thing that we haven't been great at talking about. I think mental health has too often been seen as something that only a select few people suffer from, something that you should probably not tell people about, and as long as you're not jumping under a bus, you're probably okay, kind of thing. And I think that's quite a crude way of looking at mental health. We all have mental health. We all have good days and bad days, and this kind of urge that you get to kind of hide that from other people is potentially quite dangerous, particularly if you're operating in high pressure organizations where you're making decisions and trying to actually, you can't make the world a better place without making yourself a better place first, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to end this. Ian, thank you so much for coming on and sharing insights around data and our own well-being as a regular human. The book, Data and the Built Environment, when's it out?
Next year sometime. It's probably not going to be in WH Smith, but it'll be on the internet somewhere.
Well, as you might have guessed, I've seen snippets of it. Really interesting. You got a great way of writing, a really interesting way of bringing all that information to the front and making it interesting to read. So thank you for letting me have a little sneak peek of that. And for anybody that's listening in 2024 or beyond, go and check it out. It's by Ian Gordon, Data and the Built Environment. Ian, once again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.